Kislev, defenders of the motherland, wielders of ice, and ticklers of bears. In this guide, we're going to take a look at all the units in the Kislev army and try to understand how to wield them. In the second part of this guide, we're going to take a look at the tactics, strategy, strengths and weaknesses of Kislev, and how to put it all together to make Kislev effective. So, let's get going. Leading the army, of course, it's Tsarina Katerin. To start with her combat stats, she's not too bad in melee. She's got decent melee attack and melee defense. But despite the unit card telling you she's a decent melee combatant, I would be careful with her on foot. She only has 15 armor, and with only 300 weapon strength, which isn't armor piercing, she's not going to be that dangerous or deadly. So maybe she could disrupt some missiles and take on some lower tier infantry, but tougher stuff may put the hurt on her. And don't even think about trying to take on lords and heroes with only 15 armor. It usually doesn't end well, unless they're a super squishy wizard. When it comes to her spells and abilities, she's got Stand Your Ground, a good defensive area ability for buffing troops, Ice Shard, a magic missile, so she's got a ranged attack, Frostfang, a big explosion, so good if there's clumps of troops all together, she can blow them all to high frosty hell. And then of course she's got the Law of Ice Magic, which is a combination of damage spells and support spells, so she can be a little bit of a multi-roller. Then we got a few generic things, Buy Our Bloods in there, we'll talk about that in a sec. Then we have the Frost Shield. This is an area buff, 15 armor, 12 block chance of missiles when she's casting. So another nice support ability there. Arcane Conduit for the magic recharge. The Crystal Cloak, this is one of her unique items. 20% damage resistance when she's casting. It only protects her, but it does last 30 seconds, so a nice one to help keep her safe. A little missile resistance as well. So Katerin is a strong caster lord, got some great spells to use there, some nice support abilities, but can also be quite the damage dealer with her magic missile and explosion spells as well. And it's going to be essential to put her on a mount. To be honest, she can have a horse mount, which will give her more armor, and that's about it. Or you can put her on a bear mount, which will give her way more armor and give her armor-piercing damage. So she'll be much more of a damage dealer in melee, and still have all that magic power. So she can be pretty savage when she's on a bear, whack her on a bear, she likes bears, tickle the bear, kill everybody. And then your local religious fanatic, the other legendary lord, Kostaltin. On foot, his combat stats aren't too bad, kinda similar to Katerin, a bit better in the melee attack and armor-piercing weapon strength, but still not a lot of armor, so has to be careful. Does have those fire attacks as well, so good against those weak to fire units. His abilities, though, is where he can really shine. As a Patriarch, he has Ursun's Roar, an area buff to charge bonus and leadership, so that's a good one for the initial assault. Does his Song of Winter Sunlight. This basically restores an area's vigor for 10 seconds, making them fight more efficiently. Then we have Selyak's Lullaby. This is an area heal, 3 times use, a good one for help supporting the troops. Tor's Battle Hymn, plus 40 melee attack for an area, big one to help your army doing their damage. And then there's the Buy Our Blood ability. This is the ability that every single unit in this army has that makes them unbreakable for 30 seconds when they start to waver. It's only a one-time use, but it'll make every unit fight longer than they normally would. Pretty powerful stuff. He also has Frenzy for himself, which will make him more damage dealer in the melee. And like any good zealot, he's better when he's nearly dead. Ursun's Ward, when he's below 25% health, he'll start to heal up. So he has his own regen, which will keep him alive, only up to 25% though. And then the Courage of Sacrifice, another strong ability, plus 12 leadership and some melee defense to any unit that's nearby him that's less than 25% health. And the same thing again, when he's in melee, he buffs an area with flame attacks, melee attack and leadership, another great support for troops. The Brazier Mace of Ursun as well, a damage boost for him when he's less than 50% health, he gets an extra bunch of damage. He's basically really good when he's nearly dead. Also a missile resistance as well. So Kostaltin is your support lord choice, but can still be a pretty good damage dealer as well, especially if you get him nearly dead, although that is of course a risky game to play. Having a lord run around with half health or a quarter health just to get those buffs is pretty dangerous. Either way, he's a lord that needs to get stuck into the main bulk of the fight with all the troops so that he can use all his battle prayers and abilities to buff everyone up and make the army stronger. He can also have a horse mount to get him some more armor, or a bear mount again, same as Katerin, gives him more armor, gives him more weapon strength, and he can be even more of a damage dealer and have that safety of mobility. And then your third legendary lord, Boris Ursus, otherwise known as Boris Boka. That's right, there's a third legendary lord for Kislev. Surprise, motherfucker. And what a legendary lord he is. A big damage dealer for the large units. He's anti-large, armor piercing, good melee defense and melee attack. Got a nice chunk of armor on there as well. Big charge bonus too. He's a danger on foot, let alone on one of the obvious mounts. For his abilities, he's got Fury of Urson, which is a damage boost for himself, causes terror but puts him into Rampage, and then a couple of classic abilities, Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, Stand Your Ground, most of us will know what those do, and then he has Shard Blade, which is a direct damage to an area, but it's a very small area and reduces 45% speed, so good for helping him keep a hold of those large units that he's trying to kill, keep his prey in place. He also has Heroic Resilience, a melee defense and leadership buff when he drops below 50% health, and another one when he drops below 50% health, which boosts his damage output, increasing weapon strength and melee attack. And also he has a missile resistance as well. So Boris is a big tough boy, your anti-large lord of choice. He's going to be hunting down the enemy lords if they're large on mounts and things, or any large monsters, any cavalry he could go after, monstrous infantry. Boris is your man. As all the type of stuff he wants to kill will probably be faster than him though, you'll likely want to put him on a mount, a horse again, which can give him more armor, or his unique bear mount Erskine, which gives him about 360 weapon strength and 105 armor, making him even more deadly and able to keep up with the monsters he wants to kill. Now then to one of our generic lord choices, the Ice Switch. This one of Tempest, there's also an Ice Magic version one as well. Pretty much a squishy wizard, keep them out of melee, they're not going to do too much there. Put them on a mount when you can, mostly all about using that magic. For her ability, she can summon a snow leopard, so a handy anti-large cat. She also has Glacial Blast, so a nice explosion spell there, a power recharge ability, and then the Lore of Tempest, which has a mixture, mostly damage spells with a few buffs, so she can be quite the damage dealer overall. She also has Freezing Winds, which, when she casts, will reduce all enemy speed by 25%, so that's a pretty nice ability. That's an area. Effective range, Virgin Media, so that's good. Arcane Conduit for more magic recharge. Iron Ice Armor reduces speed and melee attack of all enemies nearby her within 35 meters, so good to keep her close to the action to make the good use of that. Missile resistance as well. So as I say, squishy wizard, keep her out of melee for the most part, but she wants to be near the action. Keep her on one of her mounts to keep her safe, otherwise she will probably get jumped on and won't be able to escape. A useful lord choice if you're looking to save a bit of money. And then our final lord, the Boyar, the cheapest of the bunch and the pure melee combatant. He's not messing around with any magic. He's got strong melee combat stats, good armor, good melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength okay, anti-infantry bonus, so he's good at fighting in crowds of infantry, preferably non-armored, nice charge bonus as well. For his abilities, Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, Stand Your Ground, those classics we've seen already. Does have his own bombardment spell though, Axe of Tor. Recharges when he's engaged in melee, so you do have to get him stuck in. Then the usual stuff here. Heroic Resilience as well, plus 14 melee defense, 8 leadership when he's below 50% health. He can also support the troops with Blood of the Motherland, increasing melee defense and giving an expert charge defense to an area within 35 meters of him. Missile resistance as well. So your straight up melee lord, good for fighting alongside the boys up on the front line. Pretty tough, good at fighting in crowds, got a few nice abilities there to buff the troops and that damage bombardment spell. Can get a horse mount to make him a little tougher and of course faster and more mobile, but a bear mount is where he's really going to shine as it does give him the armor piercing damage, allowing him to take on some tougher targets potentially. So that, finally, is all of the lords. Now let's look at our first hero, the Patriarch, truly a support hero through and through. Not fantastic in the melee, at least on foot anyway, so put him on a horse or a bear when you can, but keep him by the front lines supporting them because he does come with the same battle prayers that Kostalton has, including that heal and that melee attack buff. He also has the Courage of Sacrifice like Kostalton, which increases leadership and melee defense of units below 25% health that are nearby him. He also has another area buff to friendly units at 35 meters that gives 5 melee attack and 5 melee defense. And he can also provide a small heal to himself and nearby friendly troops when he's fighting in melee. Also comes with a minus 1% vigor reduction as well. And that's a constant passive, so when he's fighting in melee, he'll be healing everybody. So he's a powerful support hero, but he's maybe not as tough as you might think, even with that regeneration. And then you have the 2 Frost Maidens, one of Ice, one of the Tempest Lorebook. These are, once again, squishy wizards. Don't use them in melee. Put them on a horse to keep them safe. Use their magic as much as possible. She shares some of the same abilities as Catherine and the Ice Witch, but does have a couple of unique ones. One of them, a big power recharge, so more magic for you to use, and reduces miscast chance. And she has an ability that stops entities dying, makes them unbreakable, but they cannot move. So a good one for helping keep a certain important unit alive in a bad situation. You'll want a Frost Maiden in your army if your lord isn't a caster. On to the bulk of the army then with... Kicking it off with Kossars then, a hybrid infantry, one of your low tier units that you'll be using a lot of early campaign, or if you need some cheap units in multiplayer, you could bring a bunch of these. They're nice because they do have a missile attack, which has some good range and reasonable missile strength, and they're okay in melee. Their biggest downfall is their armor, which means they will get shot up or magicked up pretty easily and thus won't survive very well. But if you can try to use up all or most of their ammo before you get them into any kind of melee, you can make good use of them and get some seriously good value from them, blasting down any kind of unarmored target. They're more of an anti-infantry in melee as they don't have a bonus versus large. But these ones do, the Kossars with spears. Basically exactly the same unit, just a bonus versus large on their weapon strength, meaning they're better at taking on monsters and cavalry. So these ones you want to keep on the edges of your front line on your flanks, defending from cavalry and anything trying to flank you. Or if you're facing an army that's predominantly large, like the ogres, then they could be your front line choice to help defend those off, at least early game until you get something better. They also have a charge defense and charge reflection, so make sure you keep them still and let the enemies charge into them. If you actually need a solid front line though, armored Kossars are a great start. Very tough, lots of armor, silver shield, good melee defense. These are a good surviving holding frontline unit. They also have a short range missile attack, so they can do some damage at range, give things a little shoot in the face before they get into melee with it. Or they could be useful for some anti-air with that missile as well. It is pretty strong, although not armor piercing. So these are your solid holding frontline unit. If you want to keep the enemy in place for a while to maybe allow you to flank around with cav and hammer and anvil them, these are the cheapest way to do that effectively. If you want a damage dealer frontline though that's still pretty tough and has that ranged attack, then the armored Kossars with great weapons are the way to go. Armor piercing weapon strength, so these ones are better for breaking through the enemy frontline quicker than the previous unit, and they still have that missile attack that they could use to soften the enemy up with before they arrive. Their downside though is that they don't have a shield, so missiles could be a bit of a danger for them, but if a faction doesn't really have any missiles, they can be a very strong, dangerous frontline choice if you're looking to crush the enemy frontline rather than hold it there. If you are looking for something to hold it there and the armored Kossars just can't do the job, then the Sargard are your boys. They've got big armor, silver shield again, lots of melee defense, very similar to the armored Kossars, just tougher and better at the job. They don't have a missile attack though, so they really are the pure holding frontline choice if that's all you need. If you want to buy time for cav to get behind the enemy or for missiles to try and flank and shoot people in the back, the Sargard are going to be the tanky boys that will hold all the enemies in place for as long as possible. Especially with the Buy Our Blood ability that all these units have. Remember that when they break, they will actually stay there for 30 seconds longer than they otherwise would. So they can be really good at holding. Even though all the other units can do it too, they can still hold for ages just naturally, and then they'll have Buy Our Blood on top of it. So very strong, very good holding unit. If you want the ultimate damage dealer unit though for Kislev, it's the Sargard with great weapons. Similar to the previous unit, just no silver shield now and not as much melee defense, so they're not as tough and holdy as the previous unit, but they have armor piercing weapon damage and a bonus versus infantry, so they are the frontline destroyers of infantry. If you really want to go through the enemy frontline, these are who you'll bring. Similar to the armored Kossars with great weapons, but no missile attack and more damage dealer, punch through front lines, kill everyone type of unit. They don't have a shield though, so watch out for the missiles. And then we have a hybrid unit that is more of a dedicated missile unit overall, I would say, the Streltsy. They do have an armor-piercing missile attack, which makes them the only infantry to have that. No other units have armor-piercing missiles, so they're very unique in that way, and you want to use up all of that armor-piercing ammo first, I would say, before getting them into melee. They are pretty good in melee and have armor-piercing weapon damage there too. So wherever they end up, they should be able to do some pretty good damage. They've got some armor so they can survive, although no shield, so they will get shot up if they're not careful. So these are just your main missile unit, I would say. Use them like you would handgunners of the Empire. Try to use up their ammo, keep them out of melee for as long as possible, keep them behind the front line. If possible, use the ammo on the most dangerous targets to you, the elite units, whether it's cav, monsters, the enemy lord on a mount. They can be very good for shooting down large targets, so they can serve as an anti-large unit in that way, which ultimately makes them pretty versatile and good for many jobs. And then we have Ice Guard. This one, the sword variant, another hybrid unit that probably again wants to focus on using its missiles first really. It has big range at 160, strong missile strength although not armor piercing, but does have frostbite so it can slow enemies down. That's great for buying them and the rest of the army more time to shoot incoming targets or to stop them from getting away. Again, I would advise to try and use all their ammo before you put them into melee, but when they do go into melee, they can be pretty good there too, although they are anti-infantry, as they do have a bonus versus infantry, have frostbite on that as well. Pretty good melee stats, good melee attack, good melee defense, not a ton of armor, so they do need to be careful of getting shot up, but otherwise, they can be pretty versatile in their role. They're also one of the few Kislev units that have magical attacks on both their kinds of attack, which makes them good against demons and other things with physical resistances. And then we have the Ice Guard Glaives. These are kind of a similar unit, but their weapon strength in melee is anti-large and armor piercing. So they are an anti-large unit. Get them after cavalry and monsters, lords on heroes, lords on heroes, lords on mounts, lords on heroes. That would be an absolute unit. I want to see Scarbrand running a cultist. Anyway, what was I on about? Anti-large. They are anti-large, so the ones to kill large stuff. They have the same missile attack, so that can be anti-large too, blasting down any large targets, but can still serve as taking out other kinds of infantry as well, whether it be melee infantry, slowing them down when they come in, or taking out other missile infantry that may be trying to take them out. Both Ice Guard units also have an immunity to psychology. This one, though, with glaives, has charge defense and charge reflection, so keep them still when large stuff charges into them. To the horses and bears now. Our first horsey unit, Kosovite Dervishes. These are pretty much your standard light melee cav, good for one thing and one thing alone, and that is disrupting missiles and artillery and trying to get rid of them. They do have Vanguard deployment to help them to this end, but without a shield, it is pretty risky for them as they don't have much armor. You might have some early game in campaign, but you'll likely be upgrading them quickly because they are not that great. They can be good maybe for some hammer and anvil just to inflict leadership penalties on the sandwiched enemies. They do have a pretty decent charge bonus, so they can put out a little bit of damage while they do so as well, but mostly chasing down lightly armored missiles and things is going to be where they can really be most useful. And then we have Horse Archers, who are as generic in name as they are as a unit. They are your typical, does what it says on the tin Horse Archer. They will ride around and shoot stuff. They got pretty decent range and okay missile strength, nice bit of ammo, so they can be a good harasser unit. Very quick, much like the Dervishes, so they can flank around or simply outrun things that are trying to chase them and kite them. They can do a little bit of damage over time. Importantly, over time, they don't do damage quickly, but if you can get them to use all their ammo, you could then use them in melee to, again, chase missile units and artillery and things like that. Maybe hammer and anvil. But if you've ever used a skirmish cav in your life in Total War, you know how to use this unit. To something more substantial then, with Winged Lancers, the first proper cav for Kislev. These are kind of similar to Dervishes in a way because they are very fast for a heavier cavalry, but just much better at the job. Way better stats, bigger charge bonus, more defenses, bronze shield there as well. Again, they can be great for harassing missiles and artillery and taking those out way quicker than Dervishes will, or they could be fantastic for hammering the back of an enemy front line. They can do a lot more damage there with that charge bonus. And they cause fear as well, so you can get a -14 attacked in the rear penalty on a unit and +8 from the fear. They'll be routing pretty damn quick. They are a shock cavalry though, so cycle charge them. They don't have a lot of melee defense or melee attack. Once their charge bonus is gone, they're not going to be that effective, so charge them in for 10 or 15 seconds, get them out of there, repeat. You'll primarily probably want to target infantry with these of the lighter armor, as they don't have armor piercing. You could maybe take on other cav as well if they're light, or maybe even some monsters if they're light, but that's probably not their best calling. Keep them on infantry as much as possible, I would say. And then we have Griffon Legion, who honestly are pretty much the same as the previous unit, just much tougher, much stronger, harder hitter, better at the job. They have more armor, they have more melee attack and melee defense, they have a bigger charge bonus, still cause fear, so they're exactly the same as Winged Hussars really. If you want to go for a hammer and anvil heavy kind of army, you want to use that tactic a lot, then these are going to be the best ones to do that with because they've got such a big charge bonus. If you have a frontline of Sargard, give these all the time in the world to flank around and smash infantry from the back, they will destroy them. Again, no armor piercing though, no bonus versus large, so primarily want to stick to infantry again. So if all these cavs are for taking out infantry, who's going to deal with the large? War Bear Riders, obviously. It's the bear cav we've all been waiting for. They are a big anti-large armor piercing destroyer. Lots of armor, lots of melee attack, big weapon strength, an okay charge bonus, but not a ton of melee defense, so you do have to be careful leaving them in prolonged combat depending on what the unit is. But they're still very tough, and each model has a lot of health. There's only 12 of them in a unit. You could keep a Patriarch with them on a bear, and he can use his heal to help keep them in the game perhaps, so They could be very dangerous, very strong. They're going to be the destroyers of enemy cavalry and enemy monsters, monstrous infantry, lords and heroes on mounts. They could go after infantry a little bit as well, but where they're really going to shine is taking out the large. And then to some chariots with the light war sleds. These are a ranged chariot, so they have a strong missile attack, which is armor piercing and has some good range, and they have strong weapon strength, which is anti-infantry. As a chariot, of course, they charge into infantry and run out the other side. You don't want to leave them in melee because they only have 26 melee defense. They can take damage quite quickly. So if you can charge them through, keep them coming out the other side and then pull them away and do the same again, all the while they'll be using their missile attack, or you can just use them from range and snipe at first before getting into melee. So they can be multi-role, they can be a bit of a sniper, they can be anti-infantry charging through stuff, they can be a harasser disrupting missiles by just touching them and pulling into someone else and touching them and stopping them from firing. So they can do a lot of work in different ways, and although they are the light version, they can still be very hard to stop. Not as hard though as the heavy war sleds. Basically exactly the same thing, they're just much more massy, so they're harder to stop, they hit harder. They are a little bit slower than the light version, as one would expect, but otherwise you can use them for the same job, just maybe better at the roll, although the extra speed on the light version would make them better for harassing missiles and things, but still both very powerful as chariots to keep moving, or as little snipers, ranged harassers, skirmish bears, I suppose. But both really strong units and can be a real problem for the enemy to get a hold of and to stop. To our final section then. One of our war beast choices, this nice fluffy cat. The snow leopard is anti-large and armor piercing, so good for chasing down those large targets. It can munch on cavalry, monsters, lords on heroes, and is very quick at 100 speed, so it can be a great responder to a bad situation. If an enemy large lord comes over, you can send this thing over to try and help sort it out. It does have frostbite as well, so it can slow down any targets that it attacks, stop them getting away so easy. The drawback for the snow leopard though is its lack of armor at only 20, although it does have a physical resistance, still at risk of being shot up by missiles or taking things on one-on-one could be pretty risky for it in terms of taking damage, so it might want to fight alongside other stuff to help it survive better. One thing it could fight alongside is the elemental bear. This massive behemoth of ice and bear is your only monster unit for Kislev, but a pretty strong one at that. It can put out some damage with big armor-piercing weapon strength, lots of melee attack, frostbite, magical attacks. Not a lot of melee defense though, but lots of armor and unbreakable, so he's probably going to function more as a bit of a damage soak, so he can just get in there, make the enemies all focus on him while the rest of your army kills those enemies. So he can charge around and just be a bit of a nuisance while you shoot up everything else, or charge it with cav, whatever you need to do to win as Kislev. The elemental bear can help you by just distracting and being a problem for the enemy to deal with. He also comes with his own icy breath attack, so he can do some damage from range before getting stuck into melee, or can pull out, use those breath attacks and then get back in there. He can do some serious damage and be a big old problem. And lastly for Kislev, Little GROM. Your only artillery choice, which has great range at 450 and strong missile strength at 378 and armor piercing. It is a cannon type, so can be good for shooting down large targets especially, but can shoot just about anything, infantry, cavalry. Can be a great choice to bring along if you want to play a little more defensive, or if you want to make the enemy come to you in battles. You're gonna need Little GROM. He's not bad in melee as well, with decent weapon strength there, armor piercing, anti-infantry. Is pretty quick as artillery goes. All artillery in Warhammer 3 is pretty quick, 35 speed, so he can keep up with the rest of the army. He doesn't have to sit back and lag behind, you don't have to wait for him. Got a lot of armor as well, so he can take some shots and trade with other artillery perhaps, or anything that comes after him. So useful as a powerful artillery piece that can look after itself. So there you go, all the units in the Kislev roster and what they should be good for. In the second part of this guide, we'll look at the strengths and weaknesses of this army overall, the tactics and strategies you can use to best utilize their skills, and win your battles as Kislev. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future.